Hey everyone, Matt here from Docs Running, and today we're going to do an extended review of the Puma ForeverRun Nitro. So this is Puma's first kind of natural stability shoe, I would say, non-posted stability shoe. They've tried a good number of things here, and I've got about 20 miles on my pair, so I figured it's time to get something out. And I felt like, hey, we're going to do a written review, but I figured I'd get some thoughts in here in a video review because I was going to do a sub 2, and honestly, it's so windy outside, my phone can't pick up the audio, so here I am, and I'm going to do a longer review, and you have to listen to me. So that's just how it goes. So this is, as I mentioned, Puma's first, I guess, natural stability shoe. They had a one in the previous, but this is the one that they're really banking on in terms of being that maximal, that new age stuff. And there's a lot of stuff going on. There's a redesigned insole that's been very interesting. There's some new concepts that they're trying to progress. And so how does all that work? And the answer is some of it works and some of it doesn't. So let's dive into this thing. So first off, specs wise, this thing, translated from metric, it's about 9.6 ounces for men's size 9, 7.9 ounces women's size 8. My size 10 comes in at 10.3 ounces, so kind of fairly normal trainer weight for a lot of these shoes. It's got a lot of stack height and underfoot, and here's what I don't understand is it said 36 millimeters in the heel, 26 in the forefoot, so there's a 10 millimeter drop. I would say it feels higher than that. I'd probably put it at like 40 millimeters, 30, because there's a lot of foam underfoot. The majority of the weight is back in the heel because there's a lot going on here that we'll talk about. There is a nitro kind of external rim around this shoe, nitro foam, and there's a softer core on the inside, which I'm sorry, I cannot remember the name of it. It does provide a very soft step and feel, which is really nice, but it is a softer core and a firmer external rim, which you've heard before. You've heard that with the Tempest and some other shoes out there, so that's not really anything new. But how does this shoe ride and feel? Well, there were some things that were good, and there's some things that are not so good. So let's start with the ride first. So I had some IT band stuff right away in the shoe, and I think it has to do with the fact that the bevel in the rear foot feels like, even though it looks centered, it feels like it's either a little bit more medial, or it's because there's a lot of lateral flare in this shoe. And it's kind of good for some people because if you want a centered heel, this is fairly decent. You've got these external heel counters right here that act like kind of large sidewalls. You've got some sole flare on the medial and lateral side, but it's a little bit more on the lateral side. So when I land, it feels I feel like I'm getting pitched in really quick. And that, unfortunately, the midfoot's not the most stable. It does narrow here, which is kind of a no-no for a stability shoe. And there's nothing really in the way of sidewalls or anything like that. There's a teeny one, and we'll talk about the insole in just a second. But for the most part, yeah, I got pitched in pretty hard. The heel is inherently stable, which is nice. Once the foam breaks in, which took about 15 miles, once this breaks in, it's a lot easier to land on the lateral side, and it transitions much better. If anything, I kind of think I started learning to transition a little bit, to land a little farther forward. But I don't know, because there's good evidence to suggest that we actually have no idea how we're landing, so maybe you should ignore that. So kind of a clunky heel initially. It is inherently stable with as I mentioned, the sidewalls and the stuff here. But in terms of creating a guided ride in, it's going to take some time to break in. Going through the midfoot wasn't terrible. I did mention that I did feel, as I'm somebody who typically does need some medial stability here, I was collapsing inward and had to use my own mechanics and kind of get my hip muscles and ankle muscles to kick on a little bit more. So not super stable up front. Forefoot, fairly normal. It's got a wider fit through here, and the outsole, which is fairly durable and adds some firmness to there, with the sole flare that is appropriate here, does feel like a good place to push off, and goes into my next comment. The insole has a metatarsal pad in it, which is super rare, I might add, to see that in a running shoe. This is normally something that I have to add in. I'm going to talk more about this because this is actually really cool. It's not super firm or anything like that. I get pissed off when these people say, oh, we designed this insole and it has this super arch support. This is not arch support at all. This is going to provide a nice proprioceptive cue, this little bump here, because what that does is your metatarsals kind of form a dome like this, and that's usually formed by some muscles and a little bit of ligamentous stability, but you're going to naturally sit on here like this, and that will help it might probably provide more of a proprioceptive cue to kind of push up there a little bit, but people that need a little bit more support up front, And again, I don't want to call it support. It's just a nice little bump up there. If you like having that little metatarsal pad that pushes up there, you're going to like this. If you have sensitivity of your small intrinsic muscles, you may not like this. So that's kind of the deal with the insole, and I'm really excited they're adding this in. This is something I would only add for people that need some stability, and that's going to give them stability more in the later midfoot to forefoot, not so much in the midfoot and heel. That's just how this goes. But for those who like this, that's really interesting to add that in. Now, the other thing that we got to talk about here is the upper fit, and this is what I was not a fan of. The volume of the shoe is very low in the forefoot, and I'm getting probably the most heel slippage I've had in a long time. I have been like sliding back and forth in the shoe at the heel. I did lace lock it. The laces do not stay tied. They frequently come undone. And when I did lace lock it, I got a lot of pressure on the front of my foot. So I just dealt with the heel slippage. It is what it is. So I normally like the power tape. It does seem to keep your foot on the platform. In terms of the heel, there's a lot of slippage there. And the fact that it's low volume, I'm a little confused about. But hey, for those people that have a wide heel and maybe a lower volume forefoot, this shoe is going to work for you. It's, again, I had some reservations about this. Initially, it kind of feels clunky. It doesn't feel like it transitions super well, but it's good for getting some miles in once it breaks in. Now that the nitro foam is broken in, it's much better, but there's some kind of tenets that I think were missed for creating a decent true stability shoe. I think that people that need a stable heel, you're probably going to get something along those lines. People that like low volume, and then again, the unique metatarsal lift right here, that's going to be great, but that's going to be heel and forefoot, not so much midfoot from the narrowness here that you're going to probably pivot over. I do like what they did with the internal softer foam with the rim of the external foam. I think that does a great job of creating an inherently stable ride. And I think this shoe could be described as centered for a lot of different parts just because of that design. But is it going to be a true stability shoe? Not really. Is it a shoe that's going to work for people that maybe have some mild stability needs, but also or neutral or don't need that? Yeah, that's where it's going to blend really, really nicely. But those with true stability needs, this is not going to be enough for you probably, and it's also maybe going to be a little bit clunky, especially for people for sensitivity with lateral sole flare and not a ton of medial stuff in the midfoot. But outside of that, it's something interesting, and I'm really excited that Puma did this. But I have some suggestions, and my big suggestion is with the heel bevel, people tend to land more lateral, so you've got to bevel angle that a little bit. You can have sole flare as long as you set the bevel a little lateral, because the majority of people are going to land on the lateral aspect of the sole and roll on. What you do after that, it's totally fine in terms of setting the foot. I would consider extending the sidewalls up a little bit more here because the arch support isn't really doing much, and the soft nitro foam just collapses there. So I might extend this sidewall a little bit farther forward on the medial and lateral side. I do like what's being done with this. I think that's great. Be careful with how you advertise it, and definitely don't say that the insole gives you a ton of arch support, especially when it's this flimsy. That's not great marketing on that. I understand why you did it, trying to sell a shoe, but I would try to avoid using those words unless you're actually using true arch support in there. This is great. You should advertise the heck out of this because not a ton of shoes have this. Normally you have to add it in, so that was good. Volume-wise, I would like to see a little bit more adjustable volume. This is pretty low. I like power tape. I just don't think it's securing the heel well enough, so you're going to have to work on some of that heel security because that slippage can certainly cause a problem for some people. But if you're okay with some of those things, there's no such thing as a perfect shoe. If you want this is the upper, outside of that is nice. If you want a wider heel, lower volume forefoot, a good amount of cushion in the heel, a really nice, good foam underfoot, this is going to be a shoe you might want to check out. And it's been solid. I'm going to keep getting miles on this. We'll have a written review as well. But for those who are interested, that is the Puma ForeverRun Nitro. I'm not going to say first impressions, but probably my first half the run at 20 miles. This is what my thoughts are so far. We'll have a written review and get some more thoughts up, but I'm curious to know what you think about this shoe. Are you interested? I was super hyped. I was a little disappointed when I put it on my foot. I'm hoping that changes as I get more miles on it. But what are your thoughts? What do you think about what I said? Are you interested in the metatarsal pad here? What do you think of when companies say they have a supportive insole and it's actually super flimsy? You tell me. What do you think of lateral sole flare and where a bevel should be positioned? I'm curious. You know, I talk about this stuff all the time, but I want to hear from all of you. What do you think? that's my initial video review of this shoe. Curious to get more miles, and I will report back as soon as I finish getting those miles in.